Malcolm has been patiently waiting on the line, and I want to give him a chance to talk to us right at the end here. Malcolm from California, you're live on Truth Wanted. What's up?
Hello, I just wanted to share some of the findings I've found within the religions. And I have a reason to assume or suspect that there may be another species involved in the creation of these religions.
So another species of animal involved in the creation of religions?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, tell me what that means, because I don't know what that means.
Okay, well, first I have to kind of start out with, no matter what is in the religions or whatever is found in like an archaeological site, like if you found like a Coke can or a spaceship or whatever, the default explanation is always going to be that it was entirely just humans. It was just like some human did it, and that's the default.
Or aliens. Just
no
kidding. Yeah, probably humans.
Well,
probably
that's
humans.
not the...
That's not what you're going for.
Explanation.
Okay, yeah.
Well, yeah, but the point is that because no matter what it is, that's going to be the default explanation, and that doesn't mean that's just the go-to. So it's only right to try to find the next most plausible, most possible explanation afterwards.
Yes.
Right?
That seems most plausible to me. So I'm really wondering where you're taking this.
Right. So after going through several religions, maybe not all of them, but I've found that there is a common factor, which is something of something that resembles a snake or an eel in its atomical structure. So, like, for example, the oldest ritual discovered is in Botswana. It dates back to 70,000 years ago. I guess they worshipped or paid some kind of homage towards like this.
70,000 years ago? Are you sure about that date?
Yes. Well, it could date back later or earlier, but that's what I've found, and it's not something recent. It's literally the oldest ritual that I could find.
The oldest religious practice that I know of, or at least religious structures that I know of, and maybe you have some different data, at least goes to about 10,000 years in the steppes of Turkey, the civilizations that were there. But, I want to kind of cut to the chase a little bit, because I know you've called in about this before, about this idea about,
right.
eels and snakes kind of being symbolic in many different religious cultures, right? Like, I don't want to make any assumptions about what you're claiming here, but I'm assuming it has to deal with this universality of this idea of a snake or eel in religious cultures. And so, I can see that, I can see that symbology shows up in a lot of different places. But what does that have to do with the creation of these religions? Like, what does that have to do with their formation? Are you saying that there are literal eel monsters or eel gods that played a role in all of these, or what's going on here?
Okay, so I mentioned the default explanation already, which is that's just all humans. But if we're going to go outside of that, we're going to have to figure out what is the most plausible, what is the most possible anyway. So you look up what are common factors between all these religions and what has actually caused. So in a lot of examples, like the one that I just mentioned, this oldest ritual, which you could look up, it was found in 2006 actually by some archaeologists, and they left arrowheads as like part of the ritual, I guess. But anyways, these things end up influencing language, for example. So which goes back to how my other calls were, where there was linguistic evidence of there being eels or snakes or whatever, because there's a common
Okay.
if you do like a linguistical analysis of it.
I don't want to interrupt, but I have to, because I know again, this is something you've called in about before, this kind of supposed shared etymology of eels being a thing in a bunch of different cultures. And so even if I'm not entirely convinced of that, but just for the sake of argument, I'll grant that to you. I just want to know, honestly, what is the point of talking about this? Okay, so we're seeing eels everywhere.
I could tell you what the point is. Well, the point is that the point is that this is the most plausible, most possible, has the most evidence besides just the default, which people would have to accept.
What's the most plausible?
What else there was?
What is the claim? What is the most plausible explanation? For what? For seeing these eels?
The most plausible explanation, except the ones that we have to accept by default, is that it is some other species, that it was some kind of eel, snake kind of species. At least that's what
so let me get this straight. So I got to ask you, so there's this eel species that has interacted with human cultures all around the world at some point in time that has disappeared. That is the explanation for seeing eel symbology in human cultures, and that's the best explanation.
Well, it's the best explanation besides the one that you would accept no matter what. Like, if you don't know, you're just gonna, you still don't know, right? So you're just gonna accept the default, which is it was just all humans. But if you
the second best.
Know that you don't know, you have to go towards the what it could possibly be otherwise.
Why would we accept an explanation of a being that we've never physically seen evidence of, that we've never seen record of even, because, outside of fossil evidence, right, outside of physical material, I'm not sure if all of these human cultures are literally referencing snake beings. I'm sure some of them are, but why assume a universal snake monster that's
dragon, seraphim?
Right, but those are all different things, though, right? Like a dragon isn't the same thing as this. I get that there's.
I wasn't saying it was a literal snake, though, or a literal eel. It was a cryptic eel, something that shares the same attributes as this, and which is why it's a symbol.
So
not the actual thing.
We see, we see symbols of eels and dragons in ancient cultures. Something happens to these beings that we don't see them anymore, and now we are where we are. Like, that doesn't seem like it explains a lot. It seems like I have more questions than I have answers.
I mean, you would still have the same amount of questions still, right? Because you don't know.
Well, no, I have more questions now because I want to know what happened to the snake monsters. If those are things that exist, right? Because I'm all for alternative explanations for conventional explanations of history, right? I think it's not revisionism if we're including new bodies of evidence into our understandings of past events, right? But I don't see any evidence outside of common themes and cultures worldwide that leads me to believe that these things, exist. There's a lot of God claims too in a lot of different cultures.
Go off of, though, right?
I know, but there's a lot of God claims
that
too.
We could actually use.
Malcolm, there's a lot of Malcolm. you got to let me finish here, bud, because there's a lot of God culture claims. Okay, like that doesn't mean that I believe in God any more than I do now. You know, I could see how an apologist could make a similar defense of some sort of even deistic belief, even if they're not talking about the Christian God, but some sort of supernatural higher power because of this relatability of the human experience. And I don't think that by itself is necessarily good evidence to, predicate the belief of a God, right? So I'd have to say the same thing about this idea of a universal snake, eel, dragon monster. Because there's just not enough there for me to take it in, right?
Well, I haven't really mentioned everything that there is to say about it, but I understand that there's not going to be absolute proof, right? That's what we don't have absolute proof of the default explanation that it was all humans, right? So,
wait. I don't know if we need absolute proof, right? But we do need at least some evidence outside of, humans are really good at making stuff up. Like, a human account of these things in cultures and legends and everything, like that's not going to be enough to convince me of any mythical being, period. If we had a bunch of people talk about dinosaurs, right, that's not enough to believe in dinosaurs. The only reason we believe in dinosaurs, well, one, dinosaurs and human beings didn't exist at the same time, but also because we have the physical evidence that we see, and because we can actually see like the layers of which they're buried at which time periods in history they would have been a part of. And I haven't seen any evidence of that for dragons or Bigfoot for that matter, or any other kinds of cryptids. So I don't think it's reasonable for anybody to come to those kinds of conclusions.
Well, it's reasonable to try to investigate what is the most likely besides what you're already going to, what's the default explanation, right?
Why isn't the default the most likely in this scenario?
And isn't it possible that
the problem is that no matter what it is, so if you find a spaceship that dates back 70,000 years ago, the default explanation is that it's humans. That's the problem.
I don't think that's
another hypothesis is that the reason snakes and dragons appear so often in different religious stories is the same reason they appear in Harry Potter and the Lord of the Rings. They're just interesting beings and symbols that humans pick up and turn into stories. Is there anything different between modern stories about snakes and the fact that they happen to have been involved in religious stories as well?
Well, there's quite a bit of sophistication within the religious text, and they seem to be carrying on something that is of an allegorical history. And even though these religions are separate, they are somewhat speaking of the same allegorical stories, whether it be something of like a flood or something of a
sure
creator.
But, I think
there's
Jamie's
multiple trinities within the religion, different religions, right? So you could. There's
right, but Jamie's point was
not supposedly connected, right?
Jamie's point was, Harry Potter is completely disconnected from all of those religions that you're talking about. Really, I mean, like, obviously culturally, there's going to be some streams there, but like, J.K. Rowling wasn't involved in any of those things, and yet she wrote a story that involves serpents and stuff in there. Does that lead more evidence or more credibility to this idea of a universal serpent or serpent beings that exist in the world? Not necessarily, right? So
we know who wrote Harry Potter, right? We know everything involved with Harry Potter.
Sure.
It wasn't claiming to be true. It's not a religion, didn't really impact humanity in the same way at all. I mean, this is you said it was worldwide yourself with the common themes and, the serpents. And this is why it is the thing that is second place to the default explanation, which we don't even know is true.
there's also stories of floods in lots of different cultures either, but that doesn't necessarily mean that, there was a universe, like a big flood like we see in the Bible either. I think a lot of cultures just experience floods and they made stories about it. But I don't want to make longer the point now, because we're out of time now with the show. We're going over time, but until evidence beyond human writing can tell me that there were snakes or serpents or dragons that existed in the world, I'm going to have to withhold my belief on this one, because I don't think that's enough to convince me, and I don't think it's enough to convince people, even if we're finding universal themes across different cultures. And that's not going to be enough for me to really go the extra mile in this belief. But Malcolm, thanks for calling in. Thanks for telling us about your idea. And I hope next time you call in, if you decide you want to, we can talk about what other kinds of evidences there are. Because if we're just going to talk about human legends and human ideas or man-made ideas, that's not enough. It's not enough for me.